The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 65.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the original series episode, The Enemy Within. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Welcome back, Father Corey.
Oh, glad to be back. I had a good retreat last week, but it feels good to be back.
Excellent. First, I want to say about this podcast, I've heard from some listeners who have come to this podcast from other SQPN podcasts, which is always, we love to hear that, and who say things like, I never watched the original series. I only watched Next Gen or DS9 or something like that. But because you guys are talking about it, I started watching it and I love it. And I really, that really gratifying, and that really feels great to hear that people are kind of broadening their world of Star Trek, right, because we talk about all the different stuff.
Well, and as I've said on the podcast before, I'm one of them. I really have not watched a lot of the original series. I've seen a few episodes before we started the podcast. So this has been great for me as well to be able to broaden my experience.
Well, you're younger, Father. I mean, I was growing up when the only Star Trek to be had was the original series.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the time I was aware of Star Trek, the movies were coming out. The first movies were coming out. So.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so great to hear that. By the way, the last time we had the Babylon 5, not last time as you're listening to this, but recently, well, it came out today as we're recording this. That's why I'm confusing. I'm time traveling here. The Deep Space Nine Babylon 5 comparison, one that I wasn't able to be here for because I was on vacation. Great episode. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen. It's so great because it shows that just because you're a Trekkie doesn't mean you can't like Star Wars or Babylon 5 or other things, and that we can all live together in peace.
Yeah. There's actually, and we didn't talk about this in that episode, but there's actually a nice meta reference to that in Babylon 5, because in Babylon 5, when it launched, there was a big, like there always is, there was a ruckus in fandom about, do you like Star Trek or do you like Babylon 5, as if you couldn't like both.
Right.
And so there was some friction between the different fan bases, and Joe Michael Straczynski invited Majel Barrett to come on Babylon 5, and
right.
and as a character, she played the wife of the Centauri, one of the wives of the Centauri Emperor, and she was a prophetess who had, a vision that was important to the series about what was going to happen in Babylon 5. But by this point in Babylon 5, the war had started involving the Centauri and the Narn, and she talked about how and the Emperor was dead at this point. And she talked about how this destructive conflict was never my husband's dream. And it was like,
the Emperor, Gene Roddenberry, yeah. Well, I mean, also the crossover of Walter Koenig in both. I mean, that's
Yep.
I think Straczynski. I'm pretty sure Straczynski was a fan. I'd run into him online before Babylon 5. And I got the sense he was a Star Trek fan, so that's cool.
Oh yeah, he and Bryce Zabel even a few years ago pitched a reboot project for Star Trek.
Yeah,
they were gonna do a TV version reboot, which would have basically been the original series rebooted. And they said I read their proposal, and it would have, like, a third of the episodes would be remakes of the original series, and then about a third of them would be new by TV writers, and about a third of them would be new by science fiction writers, which was kind of the formula that the original series had tried to use. They had people like Theodore Sturgeon who
Right.
was a famous science fiction writer at the time, writing episodes. I mean, he wrote like Amok Time, one of the most famous episodes of all that dealt with Spock's marriage to T'Pring.
And of course, Harlan Ellison writing City on the Edge of Forever, which is another of the most famous Star Trek episodes. All right, so that actually is a good segue into talking about today's episode, which we're going to be discussing, which is called The Enemy Within. And this is a take on the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story by Robert Louis Stevenson. I mean, that's very clearly inspired by Jekyll and Hyde. It's also the first time the terrible abuse of the transporter technology on Star Trek. There's so many scientific holes in the transporter to begin with.
No wonder Dr. McCoy doesn't want to travel through that thing.
Nobody should get in it. What have we called it before? The murder duplicating machine?
Something like that.
So
what I find, so we got a couple of things here. Not only is this technology obviously dangerously unsafe,
yes,
but we have, I mean, you can kind of excuse that because, I mean, we do have airplane crashes and car crashes here on Earth. And this, you can say, well, we just happen to focus on a transporter crash in this episode.
Right.
Then you've got the problem of where does all Kirk's extra mass come from?
Right. That was one of my notes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you can excuse that because apparently, I mean, it depending on the version you listen to of how the transporter works, you know, it's pulling energy from somewhere else. So presumably it came out of all that extra mass came out of the Enterprise's power reserves.
Right.
But the real problem here is the good evil thing.
Yeah.
How on earth do you split a person into good and evil? And they do have some acknowledgement that it's not pure good versus pure evil. McCoy notes that the good Kirk got more of certain qualities and the bad Kirk got more of other qualities, but neither one of them has a monopoly.
Well, and a lot of the qualities they were split on traits that we consider positive versus negative.
Right.
You know, not so much good versus evil traits.
I mean, if you want to throw some science language at it, you could talk about differences in brain chemistry and how certain, like, because we know, like, through psychiatry, different, brain chemicals cause people to be more or less, say, violent and aggressive, or so the evil Kirk, as we'll call him, obviously got all the testosterone out of the back, for example. But so, I mean, you could wave at that. It's still, I mean,
it's really ridiculous scientifically, but it's an interesting story. And once you give them that, you can proceed.
And that's the really interesting part of this is the question that they kind of start with is what makes us who we are? That duality that we find in ourselves. Is it necessarily a bad thing?
Well, and it's like they point out the evil Kirk has the aggression. Well, aggression also allows us to make quick decisions that are needed for command.
Gives you force of will.
Force of will,
right? Yeah. So let's talk about this story as we encounter some of the moments in the story where we see this. We'll bring it up hopefully and kind of elucidate on it. So we start with a camping trip on Alpha 177.
And they spell Alpha funny. It's not the Greek spelling, or it's not the typical English spelling of Alpha.
Yeah, it's actually the military alphabet spelling of Alpha. So I don't know if it's Roddenberry or, I mean, all these guys were probably had served in World War II or Korea at this point, so it's probably something to do with that. Sulu is walking around holding this pink yap dog with a horn.
Yeah, no.
I felt so sorry for that dog. You know it had to be drugged as calm as that dog was.
No kidding. I mean, it's like a unidog. I don't know what you call a dog with one horn off the forehead. And then you have this. They're surveying the planet, and this crewman, Clumsy Fisher. Yep, he falls and cuts his hand, but he's also covered in yellow ore. I mean, this guy could be one of my kids. I mean, just to be honest, you're covered in mud. Your hand is cut. So he has to beam back up to the ship to get treated by McCoy. And when they do, Scotty has some trouble materializing him on the transporter pad. This guy was almost a goner for a second there, I think. And then Scotty scans him with this instrument. It turns out that the instrument that he's scanning him with is, in real life, a radiation detector. So it was a real scientific instrument.
Oh, it was an actual radiation detector.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Like everybody had one of those in the 60s, I think, or something. I don't know.
Actually, they were quite common. Beginning in the 50s, the U.S. Embarked, and not a lot of people remember this, but the U.S. embarked on a let's find uranium project here in the U.S. where you could make a lot of money if you found uranium ore. And so there were lots of people going around with radiation detectors looking for uranium.
That just sounds like a bad idea, but yeah,
in nature, it's not a problem. It's
Right.
only the refined uranium
that's
that's
true.
a problem.
Right.
That was the 50s version of using a metal detector on the beach, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in nature, I mean, prior to the 1940s, the principal use of uranium was as a yellow glaze for dinnerware.
That's right. That's right.
You know, that's how safe it is. People were literally eating off of it.
That's or going into radon caves. Total tangent. I remember a story that came out last year, the year before, about a national park or some sort of park system place where out west where someone had stored uranium in a bucket in this museum. Like it's like a park museum for where there was a mine, but they've been storing this uranium in a bucket in the museum for years, and all these people who'd come through. But this was slightly higher than what they consider safe exposure levels. So thousands and thousands of people had been exposed to it over the years. So just as long as none of those people use the transporter, I think they're okay.
Yeah.
So when Kirk beams up after Fisher, Scotty had not shut things down. I think the captain said, I want to come up, and I bet Scotty overrode his instincts, shut it down, and figure out what's going on. So, you know, this is what there's a principle, like a management principle, where we override. There was the failure at NASA when the Challenger exploded, where the principle of we just keep moving forward. There's a bias toward continuing.
Kind of the law of inertia with regard to decisions.
Yes, yeah. I think Scotty fell into that. So Kirk has trouble getting beamed aboard. The first sign for Scotty should have been the fact that Kirk's uniform was missing its insignia. Did anyone else notice that? He had no insignia on his shirt. I don't know what that was about. Maybe it's just a costume problem, or they meant it to mean something.
I didn't notice that, but I did notice something later in the episode like that.
Okay, we'll come to that. I bet. And then Scotty wants to walk. Kirk feels a little faint, so Scotty wants to walk him to sickbay. And apparently,
which he doesn't go to.
Right, he doesn't actually go to sickbay. He's probably in the hall somewhere. Like he says to him, "No, I'm fine. Just leave me alone." But apparently, it's protocol that the transporter room should never be left unattended, which they violate on a continual basis as necessary going forward from this point.
Well, I love that. He says, don't leave it unattended, and then it's going to, I'll be back in just a minute.
Yes.
Or he says, Wilson, the transporter tech, will be back in just a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it may not be that you have to have someone there at all times, but maybe like when there are people down on the planet that may need emergency beam out, you need someone there at all times.
That sounds like a very good safety protocol. But in any case, the transporter activates itself. Why would it activate itself?
I assume that this is like a charge that has been built up and has to be discharged. It's like really there was one activation, but it resulted in the duplication, and they came through the system at different times.
I wonder if there's maybe a safety measure in the system that says if something's in the buffer for too long, materialize it so that it doesn't
something
degrade
like
or
that.
something. Yeah.
Which could also have like real catastrophic issues if someone can hack into the buffer and load something like a bomb. But
oh, I see a plot for a future episode of Star Trek Discovery or something. So he's Evil Kirk who beams up because he's lit from below. I mean, that's just clearly you're evil.
And he's got more mascara.
Yeah, he's got like eyeliner and mascara on. That's just that's clearly
Shatner
evil.
Shatner at his best, worst acting.
Oh my gosh, Shatner chews the scenery in this one like no end of tomorrow. It's Shatner at his best if he can do this sort of stuff. We already talked about where does the matter for Evil Kirk come from. Meanwhile, Good Kirk shows up in his quarters to lie down. because he's feeling faint. While Evil Kirk goes to sickbay and menaces McCoy for Sorry and Brandy. Like he's like that frat brother on Sunday morning who's had too much to drink last night and comes in growling at you for the hair of the dog. You know, I mean, he's just like, just give me Sorry and Brandy. And
well, he like grabs McCoy by the neck and demands the Sorry and Brandy. This is, I believe, our first instance of Sorry and Brandy as well.
Oh, yes. And of course, we get to see a Saurian in again Star Trek Discovery.
In Discovery,
which is a lot of fun. So Kirk wanders the halls of the Enterprise, swigging from the bottle. I'm surprised he didn't stop to change into a white T-shirt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A white sleeveless T-shirt, so swigging from his bottle down the hallways. And he goes to Yeoman Rand's quarters. Now this is the tricky part. Now we'll come back to Yeoman Rand because at this point they cut away to Spock. Because McCoy called Spock when Kirk, was acting a little odd, shall we say? And of course, the Good Kirk has no idea what's going on. He's like, I don't, I've been here. This is really weird.
Spock says that McCoy has said you were acting like a wild man in sickbay, and Kirk's like, no, I've been here the whole time. What are you talking about? The doctor has been having you on again. So apparently McCoy has been pranking Spock, and we haven't seen it on screen, but he's been pranking Spock, and Kirk tells Spock that I'll let the doctor know you were suitably annoyed.
This is a boy who cried wolf. This is how it is. Yep. Scotty, meanwhile, has made the Jekyll and Hyde discovery with the weird alien dog that got beamed up. And then, now, interesting, another first in this episode is the Good Kirk wearing the wraparound uniform shirt.
The green one. Yeah.
Yep.
Apparently, they kind of invented that for this episode so that we could distinguish.
Just tell the two Kirks apart.
Yeah,
exactly.
They give us a couple of ways of doing it. One is Bad Kirk has scratches on his face, and the other is Good Kirk has the green wraparound.
Right.
Yep.
Now, I'm
also one of them acts good and one of them acts bad. You can use that to tell them apart too.
There's that too. The eyeliner is a clear indicator as well. The Good Kirk would never wear eyeliner. I'm surprised.
Not that much.
Yeah, I'm surprised that when Scotty, has the two dogs, they don't go, I wonder if this could have happened to a person that beamed up. I don't know, Fisher or the captain. Like,
well, they kind of did though. They kind of go, boy, this would be terrible if this happens to a person. We got to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
And they literally left it at that.
It's like,
so we can't use it to beam up the guys on the planet. And it just didn't occur to them, wait, could this have happened to either of the two people we just beamed up?
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing that the Enterprise has shuttles to fly down and pick up Sewell and the rest because the temperatures. Oh, wait, we don't actually. For some reason, we cannot fly shuttles down.
Well, that's another. Had they even mentioned the idea of shuttles in the series yet?
They had not.
Right,
and this is part of it.
This is like episode 5 or something, and shuttles aren't introduced for at least another 5 episodes after this.
Right. In fact, the whole purpose of the transporter was so that they didn't have to build shuttle sets or create special effects of a shuttle flying through space. It was a cost saving. Yeah. So let's go back to this very disturbing scene, which is when Bad Kirk goes into Yeoman Rand's quarters, Janice Rand. This is clearly out and out sexual assault. I mean, this is it's bad. And when she's able to call for help, she gets to the door, calls for help. It happens to be the extra that they hired for this episode, the speaking extra, crewman Fisher, and Bad Kirk jumps him and punches him out and runs off, cackling in down the halls. He
doesn't really cackle.
He doesn't really cackle, but this you almost
close
expect him to. So it's.
And also in the struggle, so Kirk attacks Rand, Bad Kirk attacks Rand, and she scratches him, and then Fisher comes by, and that gets the attack stopped.
Yeah.
So
and something
that's
else,
basically what happens.
Something else is said here where Bad Kirk says, "We've both been pretending too long," and there's really kind of been this. I mean, there's only a few episodes into the series. But there was sort of this understanding early on that Janice was going to sort of be a love interest. There might possibly be this connection between the captain and the yeoman. I'm glad they didn't eventually go there because it just makes it
it's
awkward.
really unprofessional.
Yeah, it would be bad for Kirk, bad career move. But so this is kind of brought up, and so poor Janice has to deal with the fact that this comes out later on, especially as she's telling others about it. When Good Kirk is confronted, they go and investigate because of course Good Kirk has no alibi. He was alone in his quarters sleeping.
Yeah, and they have really poor preliminary investigation tactics for this thing. I mean, Kirk is right there in the room with the accuser while the initial interview is being done. I mean, I understand everyone ultimately has a right to confront their accuser, but having a sexual assault charge there when, I mean,
Especially
it's the captain and he's standing right there in the room.
Not just was he standing right there, he started the interview.
Yeah.
Right. So what are you saying?
He was involved in the interview. So
right. Yeah. That was a little. So Spock says the only logical answer is that there's an imposter on board. Because
it's nice that he gets to that conclusion so quickly.
Yeah. Now, like, because one of the Kirk's defenses is, look, do you see scrapes on my face? Of course not. Apparently, they have not come up with a dermal regenerator yet. That's not a technology they have. So then we have the good Kirk.
By the way, before we move on from the investigation, I want to note one other thing that is uncomfortable from a modern perspective. Rand, and this is kind of subtle. It's not really out there. It's not. They don't go way far in this direction. But Rand is initially hesitant. She says she doesn't want to get Kirk in trouble. And she wouldn't have even mentioned this except circumstances forced this out. But you get this almost, I would be willing to cover for you thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at least up to a point. And that, from a modern perspective, is much more uncomfortable. I think it's an artifact of the 60s when this was made.
Yes, very clearly. And we'll come back to this whole episode, this whole thing that happened with Janice at the end, because there's a quote from the actress, Lee Whitney. I want to talk about it when we get to the end of discussing the episode, because of what something happens at the end of the episode that really draws it out. But we'll come back to that. But Spock confronts Good Kirk because as the story goes on, as the events unfold, Good Kirk is becoming more and more indecisive, passive, vulnerable, and Spock calls him on it. He tells him, you can't be vulnerable. You can't be less than perfect in the eyes of the crew.
It's interesting that Kirk is weakening in this way. So it's not like they had the traits fixed exactly upon the transporter duplication. They're continuing to change, which is interesting. I thought the speech that Spock gives Kirk was kind of, okay, I can imagine this as military posturing. It's kind of overdramatic dialogue. I wrote down the exact quote for part of it is, you can't afford to be anything less than perfect.
Yeah.
And like in the eyes of the crew. And I'm going, I'm pretty sure that the crew on any ship knows their captain is not perfect.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, Father Corey, maybe you can speak to that. Did you ever think any of your superior officers were perfect? I'm pretty sure there's a lot of scuttlebutt on ships about the captain's flaws.
Obviously, I don't have experience on ships, but I can just say, we knew our superiors and we knew how flawed they were. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We won't make you tell us any more than that. Those guys.
I probably couldn't remember any stories, but it's just, we knew that. Of course, we knew that we were flawed too, but we knew stories, and it was more important: were they good leaders? Even knowing they were flawed, were they good leaders?
Yeah, it's like in any workplace. Everybody knows their boss has flaws and quirks, but are they a good boss?
Right. Yeah. I think what Spock really wants to say is they need to know that you're decisive, that you're in control, that you know the right thing to do next. And I think that's the key to that leadership that he's looking for. Because if you're following this guy's got your life in his hands. He's giving you orders that may risk your life. You don't want him to be kind of a quisling, to use a older term. So
You don't want him to be a Norwegian traitor to the Nazis?
I do not want Kirk. So you look it up, folks. So he orders Spock to tell him, your orders are to tell me when I'm slipping again. So very strong orders there. Luckily,
I got the sense that he was about to say, if you catch me slipping again, you're to take over.
Right.
And then he backed off and said, you're to tell me.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of that hesitation in the voice. So luckily now Evil Kirk is gets back to his cabin. In addition to eyeliner, he apparently also has flesh-colored makeup in his quarters.
Exactly.
So Good Kirk may go easy on the eyeliner, but wow, he's got base. He's keeping base in his wardrobe.
Got to keep his perfect skin to go along with his perfect orders and personality.
He knows how to apply it, so he puts it on there to mask his scratches on his face. He takes Good Kirk and Spock have ordered everyone to be carrying phasers, be on the lookout for his duplicate. Evil Kirk confronts a crewman. I think it's Wilson from the transporter.
Yes,
another SAG actor that we have to get the per diem out of for his lines. He confronts him, takes his phaser, and then knocks him out. And then Spock and Good Kirk go down to engineering. They're trying to figure out if Kirk was hiding, which he is, where would I go? So they go down to the engineering spaces and they confront him and try to convince Good Kirk tries to convince Bad Kirk they need each other, that they give each other whatever.
You can't kill me. We're part of each other.
Yeah, Evil Kirk's having none out of it. So as Spock neck pinches Bad Kirk
first
shoots.
Introduction of the neck pinch.
Is that this one? Okay.
Nice.
This is the first introduction of the neck pinch, and it wasn't in the script. The script just said for Spock to KO Bad Kirk, and Spock decided that was a little un-Vulcan.
Yes.
And so he came up with the neck pinch as an alternative to punching people.
Interesting.
Nice.
Because at this era, the KO was a neck chop, like a chop to the neck, which
Think of some of the Kirk moves.
yes, Shatner had no problem doing the neck chops.
And by the way, as all this is going on, there's the subplot of the crew, Sulu and the crew on the planet that are freezing to death because they can't be beamed up, and of course they don't have shuttles. So
yeah.
It's apparently absolute zero or something.
Yeah, it was like 175 degrees below zero. Now we don't. I would assume Fahrenheit, which isn't quite as bad as 175 Celsius, but
at 175, it doesn't really matter.
Nope. Believe me, from experience, below about 30 below, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that Spock says they tried transporting thermal heaters down, but they duplicated, and so the good and bad heaters wouldn't work at that point.
Maybe one had the fuel and the other had the lighting element. I don't know.
And there's no way to bridge the two. Yeah. What I want to know, though, is why, if the thermal heaters didn't work, how about the non-thermal heaters? Why didn't you transport down some non-thermal heaters?
Because thermal heaters are just too complicated. Just use regular heaters, the cold heaters.
I mean, at least you have them using the phasers to heat rocks. So at least you got that.
No, that's cool. I like that.
An effect that we will never see again. There's this very nice exchange between Kirk and Sulu as he's talking to him on the planet, where we see Sulu's his sense of humor and personality a little bit.
We get a lot of banter out of Sulu in this episode.
Yes, we did. Sulu, do you think we might be able to find a long rope and lower us a pot of coffee? He's guy's freezing to death, and
or rice wine,
rice wine. Yes. So, but as Spock was neck pinching Bad Kirk phasered just happened to phaser the transporter equipment. Just happened to shoot the thing that break the transporter. So now Scotty has to fix that. And this is at a point where in the episode where we kind of get this philosophical discussion about the nature of good and evil in a man.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that we're only halfway through the episode and they've got Bad Kirk in custody.
Right.
And except for a little bit later on, he remains in custody for most of the rest of the episode. So it's not like we've got this manhunt plot going on. They just grab him pretty quick.
Right. He doesn't get away for very long, which I'm glad they didn't drag it out. That would have been, makes it more interesting. So we have between Kirk and McCoy, this is a little bit of a discussion in sickbay about. At first, Kirk is like, I don't want him back. He's an animal, but I can't survive without him. And so he's feeling this, this conflict within himself about bringing him back. And then Spock says his negative side, which you call hostility, lust, violence, and his positive side, which Earth people express as compassion, love, and tenderness. So Spock sees the evil side properly controlled and disciplined is what makes a man a leader. So the so-called evil side, or the negative emotions and personality traits. It's an interesting viewpoint on that.
We have, and I want to come back to that in a second, but we also have some kind of amping of the drama because McCoy says that the body function weakened during duplication, and that's why these two can't survive permanently without each other. And Bad Kirk starts to actually panic and die at this point, and Good Kirk takes his hand and reassures him and tells him to focus and use his mind, and he can calm down and not die. So apparently he was on the verge of having a fatal panic attack.
Right.
But then because Good Kirk has more self-discipline and he was able to impart some of that to Bad Kirk is able to save himself from panic dying. And then McCoy, picking up on, what Spock was arguing, says we all need our darker side. And this, I think, is Gene Roddenberry speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who wrote this episode. I didn't look that up, but it's very much a piece of the Roddenberry philosophy. And frankly, it comes off as a rationalization of evil up to a point. I would look at this and say, as a Christian, and say, no, actually, we don't need our darker side. That's broken. You can have decisiveness and decision-making and firmness, and all of that can be virtue. If we were unfallen, we wouldn't have a problem making decisions. And so I think philosophically, from a Christian point of view, we need to disentangle this idea that we need our negative side to drive us to do things.
Right.
We don't. That's broken. And it does relate to things that are there that are virtues properly done, but don't confuse things like decisiveness and firmness with evil. They're not the same thing.
Right. I think there was this movement or this idea in society at some point that these things were related, that for a man to be decisive, he also had to be coarse, or aggressive toward women, or, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's Nietzschean or something along those lines.
I think it's rationalization is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a way to justify what you want to be bad about.
Right.
Well, and it's also, I think, a lot of the Eastern mysticism, yin and yang, you got a light side and a dark side, and it's not good and evil. It's just there are things we consider positive and things maybe we consider negative.
Right.
But
I think it's also related to the psychology of the period, which was, I mean, in the mid 20th century, you had all this psychoanalysis stuff and looking at our light side and our dark side and how do they relate and things like that. And it was just pop psychology.
Yep.
Not
Exactly.
to get too far into an unrelated subject. I don't want to get too much into it, but this is what people are talking about when they say in the 70s and even 80s, they got bad advice on how to deal with people who otherwise good people who have done horrific things. We have to help them integrate those things into their personality, and then once we do that, we can send them back out to the world.
Yeah.
And that this is what we're talking about. This sort of thinking where we have to abide by evil instead of excise it.
That's what we've got here. This is the supreme. Let's reintegrate the evil into the personality, and it'll be functional.
Right.
Yep.
So it's
by the way.
Yep.
By the way, this was written by Richard Matheson.
Richard Matheson. Okay.
Who was a sci-fi author.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, The Shrinking Man, which was made into The Incredible Shrinking Man. So he wrote the novel The Shrinking Man.
Yep.
And some other stuff. So yeah, I've heard that name. He wrote I Am Legend too. Interesting.
Yep.
The book that the movies were based on.
The book.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is about vampires and not zombies.
Right. Well, so you had the Omega Man, which was sort of zombies, and then you had the I Am Legend movie, which was vampire zombies.
You also have the Last Man on Earth, the first version of it with Vincent Price.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's one of those stories that is so good you had to make it 3 times. So they get a patch for the transporter, yes.
and they beam down the animal, and then a doll beams back up.
Yeah.
Yes. Or a heavily tranquilized dog.
No, it's a doll.
It's a doll. It's clearly a doll.
So when they did the beam down, it was the actual dog and then the doll for the evil one. Because, of course, they tranquilized the evil dog to get it out. And then when they beamed it back up, it was just the doll.
Yeah, so over which McCoy walked over and says, "He's dead, Jim."
Yep.
So I don't know if that's the first one, but it might be. Spock. Now we have Spock giving the captain's log. The captain is apparently so indecisive he can't make logs.
Entry made by Second Officer Spock.
Yes,
his rank has become unfixed. He's not the first officer here. He's the second officer.
I mean, is this because so?
I would guess that was probably a script error.
Probably.
Yeah, that would be my guess too.
Well, the one thing I was going to think about is these episodes in the first season were made out of the order they were broadcast. In fact, there's like several different orders. We've just kind of following one particular order that's available in doing these episodes. But there's several different orders that they were produced in, and this was
the 5th. This was produced the 5th, released the 5th.
Okay, but it's numbered 4, so I don't know what's up with that. But it's not right after Where No Man Has Gone Before,
right?
Which Gary Mitchell was the first officer, so it's not really a holdover from that. But some people have kind of said online that that's what they thought it was, but it's not. Spock and McCoy, they
disagree. What a surprise!
Yes, and they keep pulling Kirk in different directions of what he should do, back and forth. And Spock has an interesting identification. He says he compares it to his own Vulcan-human split.
Yeah. So we should explain that, because the hypothesis about why the doll beamed back up instead of the living dog is the animal didn't have the brain power to handle being reintegrated, and it died of shock. Yep. And so Spock's hypothesis is, hey, I'm a hybrid, and I can handle it. So if I can do it, then Kirk, you just need to deal. You're not a dog with a horn. You've got the brain power to handle being reintegrated. Right.
And McCoy is, I don't know what McCoy wants him to do. Live like a weeping child.
I think McCoy says is you can't risk your life on a theory. Right. And so I think McCoy is urging he wait longer until they can get a more suitable proof that the transporter will work without killing him.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
Which shouldn't be hard. I mean, go get a rabbit from sickbay, beam it down, let it duplicate, beam it back up, and see if you fix the problem.
Right. Or bring up the thermal heaters that have split.
Yeah. See if thermal heaters can handle being reintegrated, their good and bad sides.
So Kirk, because he's unable to make decisions, wants someone else to do it. And Spock asks him.
Yeah, he even says somebody make the decision.
Yeah. And then when Spock says, "Are you relinquishing command?" because that's essentially what that would be doing, Kirk is emphatic about, "No, I'm not." I mean, there's still something in him that still says, "I am in command," and there's still that strength somewhere in there. And so he gets ready for the transporter. But in the meantime, Bad Kirk gets the drop on Good Kirk, takes his uniform,
pretends to be weak, and for some reason, Good Kirk alone goes into sickbay to get Bad Kirk down to the transporter
security guy, Spock, nobody else, just
Mr. Weakling, little girl, goes in to take care of the big aggressive Jekyll, or Mr. Hyde, actually, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So he takes his uniform, then runs into Rand in the corridor, and is about to menace her again. But then he goes to the bridge and orders the ship to leave orbit and abandon Sulu and the landing party. Which, the crew is like...
it says they can't be saved.
Right. And the crew members in the the navigator, the helmsman are like, that doesn't sound right. And and that's at which point the bad Kirk starts, showing his cards and kind of freaking out a bit. Good Kirk shows up, and the crew is confused. No confusion. The real one's the one who didn't just order them to leave their crew members to die. Not a hard decision.
So they're screaming at him.
Right. This is not a hard thing to figure out here. So they take Kirk back to the transporter room. The bad Kirk, good Kirk. Good Kirk gives a nice bear hug on bad Kirk. They're there.
Yeah, the two Kirks hug it out.
Yeah, they hug it out and get beamed into. That would have been really gross if they just beamed out, beamed back, and they were just one integrated mess. That would have been really gross. Sorry to bring that up. So they beam.
I guess he shouldn't have bet his life on a theory, huh, Mr. Spock?
Yeah.
So they beam him back together. They save the landing party. And then Kirk eventually tells McCoy, "I've seen a part of myself no man should ever see." I think that a little self-examination is actually good for the soul, Captain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So maybe you should see it. But point taken.
Yep.
So then we end on a really bad note. Bad writing, bad directing, something went wrong. But it sort of is something from the times. And I kind of want to mention it because Grace Lee Whitney talks about this in her memoir, this particular moment in the episode.
Yeah. And this, we should note, is part of a writing formula that they would use on Star Trek, where at the end of every episode, not every episode, but typically they would try to end with something lighthearted, like a little joke, like maybe a quip between McCoy and Spock or something like that, or a zinger from Kirk.
Right.
And so this is the out joke for this episode.
Right. And as a kid, this went over my head. But as an adult, living in the times we live in, this is really strikes a sour note. So Rand comes to the bridge. Kirk's there. Rand says, "Captain, the imposter told me what happened, who he really was. And I'd just like to say that, well, sir, what I'd like is..." And then Kirk says, "Thank you, Yeoman." He kind of cuts her off, like, you don't have to say anything. And then...
I wasn't sure what she was even going to say at that point.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, she's not about to make a play for the captain here. And so what is she going to say?
I think she's going to forgive him, maybe, or let him off the hook, like it really wasn't you, or you weren't in your right mind, or something along those lines. But Spock says, he kind of gets this glint in his eye and says to Rand, "The imposter had some interesting qualities, wouldn't you say, Yeoman?" And like
the implication is Spock has picked up on the Yeoman was attracted to the imposter, or to Bad Kirk. Not really an imposter, but to Bad Kirk. And now she's kind of angling a little bit for the captain.
Right. Like, ooh, maybe he really would be interested in me. But it's so gross. So this is what Grace Lee Whitney says in her memoir. "I can't imagine any more cruel and insensitive comment a man or Vulcan could make to a woman who's just been through a sexual assault. But then some men really do think that women want to be raped. So the writer of the script, ostensibly Richard Matheson, although the line could have been added by Gene Roddenberry or an assistant scribe,
who rewrote everything,
right, gives us a leering Mr. Spock who suggests that Yeoman Rand enjoyed being raped and found the evil Kirk attractive." So that's Grace Lee Whitney's point of view, although she also goes on to say that this is one of her favorite episodes that she was in. She just other than this, it was a good episode. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that as a giant flaw in the story, that it's not just because of the times we live in. It's just, it should have been obvious to people then that on a family show that airs in prime time, just it's unfortunate that this was put there. So I just wanted to say that and mention it out there, just so that we don't gloss over it either. Star Trek is great, but sometimes it missed the...
Sometimes it's not.
Just remember last time we talked about TOS, we talked about Mudd's Women, so that had plenty of stuff that shouldn't have been on primetime television too.
Right.
So
That's true. So actually, we have some feedback about Mudd's Women, but before we get to that, I want to ask you if you've got any final notes on Enemy Within. Father Corey? Yeah.
Well, the only thing I got to say is about Yeoman Rand. I kind of felt sorry for her. How long did it take to put that beehive together? I hope it was a wig. I really hope it was a wig, because that was like
that's elaborately
intricate hairdo. Weaved.
Yeah. Jimmy?
So I had in my notes, Shatner's double gets a lot of work in this episode.
Yes, he does.
He's got a body double that we're constantly seeing the body double from the back.
Yeah.
In this episode, there's, I think, only one shot where they actually use a split screen. It's where the two Kirks are sitting beside each other in sickbay. One of them's in bed, one of them's next to it. And I think that's the only split screen shot. Other than that, it's all body double.
Well, and that's, there was down in engineering, there's a couple scenes where you see the body double facing the camera.
Yeah, it's like they try to do some quick cuts and other gimmicks, but you do get a sense of that ain't William Shatner.
Nope.
Yeah. Also, on the bridge, during the bridge confrontation, all of a sudden, there's another mysterious transporter effect. Not only are their personalities changing, but so are the sides of the face on which the double has the scratches.
Oops.
Yeah.
Continuity.
They previously have been on his left cheek, and all of a sudden they're on his right cheek for no apparent reason. Also, when they are reintegrating the Kirks, I thought it was interesting. They took a really long time. They're doing it to hype the drama, but they beam Kirk out, and then there's this extended waiting period where there is no captain in existence.
Right.
Yeah.
Before they finally beam him back in. And I just thought, wow, this is kind of creepy. It's like the captain does not exist right now.
Yeah.
We could leave him like that or something. But those are my other notes.
Awesome. Well, like I mentioned, we do have some feedback from previous episodes on the Muds Women episode. We're still getting some feedback on that. Charles Gervasi on YouTube writes, I never noticed the biblical references. I didn't know that wiving settlers was a common Wild West theme. And then he said the lie detector was used again in Wolf in the Fold, that they had this whole sequence where the computer was used to detect Mud's lies. And I wonder what this show is going for with the women as sex objects versus pre-World War II gender roles. The elephant in the room is women as equal partners beyond just cooking, mending clothes, and being emotional. Was that intentional, or were the writers just not thinking of the idea of women being equal? So were they trying to say women should not just be viewed in their as like attractive decorations, and that they should be treated as equals beyond their look? And what
I think they were trying to make them look as equals, but by the understanding that they had at the time, especially again Gene Roddenberry.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that fundamentally the script is in favor of not treating women as sex objects all of the time.
Right.
But I think Gene Roddenberry's proclivities here are on display. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the episode where we really get the authorial viewpoint, it's women are more than sex objects, except when they're not.
Right.
Yeah.
For Gene Roddenberry.
Right. For Gene Roddenberry. So, and then Mark Lindemann has sends us an email, says a long email. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, a couple of things struck me. Somehow the diamond industry has managed to maintain its place as a benchmark of value, even with some planets raining diamonds. They say that a lithium crystal is worth 300 times its weight in diamonds. So, yes, apparently De Beers is still strong a few centuries in the future.
It's all because of market control.
Exactly. He also says we talked about how when they're told they have 3 days, 7 hours of power, we mentioned it didn't quite fit with the feel of the time that it takes place in the show. But he says if you take into account the extra energy used to move to a geosynchronous orbit that they needed to do to do the search for one of the women, that would have used a lot of energy to penetrate the magnetic storm, and it may account for the missing energy. And we know they didn't have a geosynchronous orbit when they arrive, as Kirk says, beam up the miners when the ship passes over the camp. Geosynchronous means you're over one point continuously. So good catch on that. Yep. Mark, that's a good one.
There was one thing he mentioned in this email I thought was kind of funny, where he talks about, understand gold still having high value due to its use in electronics, but then in DS9, gold pressed latinum was valuable not because of the gold, but because of the latinum within the gold. Because there's an episode where they get these riches. Quark gets these riches, and they open up this vault, and it's all empty bars of gold, and he's saying it's worthless gold as he's breaking them open, trying to find the latinum.
Yeah, at some point they say that like a bar of gold pressed latinum is like 99.5% gold and like a very tiny percent of latinum, and all that value is. But it's they use gold pressed latinum, I think, because it's hard to extract the latinum from the gold or something.
Right.
I don't
It's
know.
like a liquid or something like that that's inside the gold.
Someone on the Star Trek staff figured out some way to make a currency of value in a world with replicators. So
Yeah, exactly.
So that was good. All right, thank you both for your feedback. We really do appreciate it, and we love to get your feedback. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, I'll give you all of our contact information in a second. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Star Trek, including Armin P., Teresa C., Susan B., Sandra C., and Donna K. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What do you think of The Enemy Within, this episode? You have any comments on what we had to say about it or about the episode itself? We would love to hear from you. You can go to sqpn.com/trek. You can go to the SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can also send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thanks.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, I want to live!